Hello guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Hit the bell icon button so that you don't miss out any tutorial.
Okay, let's talk about scales. Now, if you've ever sat down to learn an instrument, one of the things you probably did in one of your earlier lessons was to learn how to play some scales. Probably a C major scale, maybe a B flat major scale, maybe a G major scale, depends on the instrument. Why? Why do we care about scales so much? I wanted to point this out because I remember learning how to do this and thinking, I am so sick of scales. They are so boring. And they are. They're quite boring to play. But from a music theory perspective, what scales do is they show us a pattern. And that pattern we kind of can use as a template to see almost all of music. So we look at that template and we kind of put it over top of all kinds of melodies and all kinds of harmonies, and that shows us what's going on. We basically compare it to a scale. We compare the music we're seeing to a scale. For example, in this piece of music that we're looking at here, this is just kind of a random piece I found on the MuseScore website, but it's a nice little piece. We see little scale fragments all over the place. In those scale fragments, I can tell what key we're in because of those scale fragments. I can tell when we go outside of that scale, meaning we're changing keys or we're just doing something not entirely, let's say, predictable, which is okay, which is preferred. It's actually great. I can also compare scales to all of these chords that I see in the left hand of this piano part. All of those chords are made from scales. Scales make up chords, or maybe it's more accurate to say that backwards. Chords are made from scales. That's a better way to say that. Chords are made from scales. So we take a scale, we take certain notes out of the scale, and that makes a chord. That's exactly how chords are built. So we can't really build chords until we understand how scales work. And we can't build melodies that stick to certain keys until we know how scales work. So melodies, harmonies, kind of everything is built around different scales. So we have to know how they work if we're going to understand really anything about a piece of music. So let's dive in. So up next, I want to talk about a couple different definitions, particularly the words chromatic and diatonic. These are two words that I'm going to use a lot, and we need to get very familiar with them. So let's dive over into a new video and talk about that. Okay, two very important words, chromatic and diatonic. Now, in order to explain these, I think a easier way to do it just at first is to look at a piano keyboard to kind of understand what's happening here. So if you're using MuseScore, you can pull one up by going to the View menu and then Piano Keyboard, or you can just hit the letter P and turn one on and off. It's very nice. So let's have a look at this, and let's hover right around middle C here. So what is the difference between chromatic and diatonic? The easy way to put it is diatonic means we're in key. If we are playing a melody that is diatonic, it's going to stay in a certain key. Now there's, sometimes one note can go out of that key and stuff like that, and we can still call it diatonic. But more or less, diatonic means we're in a key. So if we're in the key of C major, which is all of the white notes, right? So we're going to talk about keys shortly, don't worry. But trust me, for now, the key of C major is just white notes. So if I was playing a melody, something like that, that is diatonic because I am staying in the key of C major, right? So diatonic means staying in key. Now the opposite of diatonic is chromatic. Chromatic means there's no key. It's pure chaos. It's the total wild west of music is chromatic. So that means any note goes. Chromatic, the word itself, we get from the word chroma, which means color. So it's like using all of the colors. Chromatic music, music that is completely chromatic, tends to be, I should say, pretty ugly and pretty dissonant and kind of crazy out there. Now, there are people that made whole careers on writing entirely chromatic music, and we'll talk about that sooner or later in this class, near the end. And a lot of it is really interesting, but it sounds kind of crazy. And so chromatic would be something like, I'm going to just not worry about what key I'm in at all. I'm going to play. Like I could play all the notes, and that is chromatic music. So those are the two differences, chromatic and diatonic. Chromatic means any note will work. Any note is fine to use in a chromatic setting. But in a diatonic setting, it means we're locked into a key, or as I just said in the previous video, into one of these templates that I'm going to call a key or a scale. I'm locked into a scale or a key, and most of my notes are coming from that. So the majority of the music that we're going to work with in this class, actually I might even say all of the music that we're going to work with, is going to be diatonic. It's going to be in a key, and it's going to use mostly notes from within that key, with the occasional note goes out of the key, and that just makes it sound fun and interesting. But for the most part, diatonic music is what we're working with. So I might say, we might look at a piece of music and I might say, oh, this gets kind of chromatic in a section, meaning it starts to go outside of the key quite a bit, but then it comes back into the key and resolves or does whatever it needs to do. So that's what I mean when I say something gets a little chromatic. It means it's going outside of the key, right? So that's what those two words mean. They're very important words. Okay, one last thing about how scales and keys work before we dive into figuring out our first couple scales is that another way to look at these is something we could call, and you see this written sometimes, ordered pitch class collections. That is a super fancy way to say a scale. It's an ordered pitch class collection. So let's dissect those four words. So let's start with pitch class right in the middle here. So an ordered pitch class collection, the pitch class element of this is something we looked at in the first class that I put together on music theory on how to read music. What a pitch class means is it simply means any note regardless of the octave that it's in. So let's jump over and look at that. So what that means is here's an F, here's an F, here's an E, and here's an E. Okay, so I have F, F, E, E in different octaves, right? So these two Fs are of the same pitch class, meaning they are of the pitch class called F. They are essentially the same note, but in different registers, so we call them pitch classes, as are these. These are two different E's. They belong to the pitch class E, but they are different pitches technically because they are in different registers. So the reason we would use that when we're talking about scales is because if I do this is the beginning of a C major scale. Okay, those are the first four notes of a C major scale. If I do it up an octave, those are also the beginnings of a C major scale. right? So the first four notes, C, D, E, F, and here is the same notes, C, D, E, F. So this is a long about way of saying the octave doesn't matter. If we're in the key of C, we can use any note in the key of C in any octave. So that's what the pitch class element of that four-word thing means. Now let's go to the first word of this goofy little phrase, ordered pitch class collections. So the word is ordered. That means scales are in an order. They are, this is the first note, the second note, the third note, and the fourth note. Now what I have up here on the screen right now is a little incorrect. I want to get rid of it. It was correct for what I was saying before, but it looks like this is a scale, but it's not because I've skipped a whole bunch of stuff right here. So let's make this a proper scale. So F, G, A, B, C. So this is a C major scale right there, beginning to end. And that is the order of the notes in the scale. Now that doesn't mean we have to use those notes in order by any means. In fact, we usually don't use the notes in order. But a scale, as it is a ordered series of notes. So it means if I'm going to say this is the major scale, I'm going to play those notes in order. If I say this is a melody or a harmony derived from the C major scale, then I'm not really using them in order. But by definition, a scale is an ordered set of notes. Now let's go to the last word of that fancy term, ordered pitch class collections, say collections. It is a collection of notes. I just said set of notes, just another word for collection. So it's a group of notes in an order in any octave. That's what that term means. So when you see that, that's what we're talking about. Ordered pitch class collections. It's in an order because there is an order to a scale. Pitch class means if one note is in it, then any other octave of that note is in it as well. And collection means it's a group of notes. So it's a group of notes in order, any octave. There you go. So don't let that term freak you out if it ever pops up. So we now know what scales are, and we know what chromatic and diatonic means, right? So let's talk about our first scale. The first scale we're going to talk about right now is kind of the easiest one. The easiest one when it comes to understanding how scales work. And that is the chromatic scale. Now we're not going to spend a lot of time on the chromatic scale because it's not really going to be hugely useful to us for a long time. But it does do a really good job of explaining to us what scales are. So the chromatic scale is every single note we've got. So let me pull up my piano keyboard here. Oops. There we go. So I'm going to start. The thing about the chromatic scale is you can start anywhere. Well, I guess you could say that's kind of true of major and minor scales also, but more on that shortly. I'm going to start on C here. So I'm going to enter the notes as I type. So if you're wondering how to do that in MuseScore, hit this little N and then hit keys on this keyboard and they will get entered up here. So here's a C, right? So in the chromatic scale, it is all possible notes. So here's C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and C. There we go. Let's scroll back and have a look at that whole thing. Let's turn that off so we can see a little bit better. There we are. There is the chromatic scale from C to C. It is every single note, right? Now the reason this is important is because we're about to start talking about major scales. And what major scales are, actually what any other kind of scale is the chromatic scale where we're going to leave off some notes in a way that makes a pattern. So for the major scale, we're going to leave off this note, this note, this note, this note, and this note, and then we end up with a major scale. Now don't worry about what I just said. I'm going to clarify how that exactly works in the next video when we start talking about major scales. I just want to point out here that the chromatic scale is all the notes. The major scale and minor scale and all the other kinds of scales are the chromatic scale with some notes left out.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, do give us a thumbs up and share it. Also check out amazing discounts and offers on our premium courses in the description below.